The 6 o'clock news from the BBC with Peter Sissons and Anna Ford.
Good evening. The headlines at 6 o'clock. Waves of Allied aircraft have been bombing targets in Iraq and Kuwait all day long in one of the most sustained aerial bombardments in history. And tonight, Allied ground forces have begun taking up positions closer to the Kuwaiti border. Allied warplanes flew more than 1,000 missions. Casualties are reported to be remarkably light. The Americans fire more than 100 cruise missiles at Iraq from their ships in the Gulf. The main sign of Iraqi retaliation, they shell an oil refinery in Saudi Arabia. Saddam Hussein appears unshaken. He repeats his call for a holy war against the forces of Satan. 18 hours after it began, the Allied bombing of Iraq is still going on. By early afternoon, the American Defense Secretary was able to say that Allied warplanes had flown more than 1,000 sorties over Iraq and occupied Kuwait. Throughout, there seems to have been little resistance from the Iraqi Air Force. 2 Allied planes were lost in the second wave of air raids, 1 British and 1 American. It's believed that the British crew bailed out and that a mission is being mounted to try to rescue them. In the wake of the air attack, Allied ground forces have begun advancing, taking up positions closer to the Kuwaiti border. And the Egyptian news agency reported this afternoon that 50 Iraqi tanks drove over the border and surrendered to Egyptian troops in Saudi Arabia. During the air offensive, in Baghdad, the Defense Ministry and the Post Office were among key installations directly hit. The headquarters of Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party was also bombed. Across Iraq and Kuwait, airfields, missile sites, command and communication centers were all targeted by waves of Allied warplanes. The Iraqis replied with an artillery attack on the Saudi oil refinery at Ras al-Hafshi, but the threatened Iraqi assault on Israel did not take place. The Israelis say the Allied bombs destroyed the missiles aimed at them. Saddam Hussein remains defiant. He said the air raids were criminal. It is time, he declared, to get Satan out of the White House. President Bush said he was very pleased with the events so far. We are determined to finish what we've set out to do. The airstrikes have been carried out by planes from America, Britain, France, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Our correspondent, Barron, watched some of them leaving Dhahran Air Base in Saudi Arabia.
This was a night and a day in which Iraq trembled under the hammer blows of Tomahawk cruise missiles never before fired in anger. These precision weapons of the 21st century, carrying conventional warheads, were fired at Iraq 300 miles away from the battleship Wisconsin in the Gulf. Baghdad's defense ministry was one of the targets that took direct hits. Onshore, in the darkness of the night, the American Air Force prepared what proved to be one of the greatest surprise attacks of modern warfare. For days they'd been tensely waiting while Saddam Hussein contemptuously rejected final peace moves. Just before the lethal aerial armada took off, the commander of the lead plane shrugged off all doubts.
We feel more than prepared. We feel very ready. We've been ready for 5 months now. It's a job that needs to be done, and we're prepared to do it.
Ahead lay the unknown capabilities of the Arab world's most powerful military machine, but the Americans seemed raring to go.
Hit them hard. Yes, sir. We'll kick your ass. Okay.
The mission of these Phantom F-4s was to knock out the Iraqis' surface-to-air missiles, the SAMs. Success would safeguard the low-flying bombers, such as RAF Tornadoes. So Operation Desert Storm started like this, with the unsuspecting Iraqis about 1 hour's flight away. Everyone in these American squadrons in Saudi Arabia had trained to perfection, but they dreaded the wait for the pilot's return from Baghdad and had a sensible respect for the opposition.
They're facing a tremendous arsenal of weaponry, a broad spectrum of surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft, guns, other enemy fighters that have air-to-air missiles. They're facing a very difficult task ahead.
But the mightiest air attack ever launched achieved stunning results. The pilots were back in 3 hours, having devastated much of Iraq's air power. Dogfights were rare, but this is how one Iraqi plane was lost.
While we're going in there, the bombs are going off everywhere. There's huge concussions. As we're coming up north, you can see just concussions all over the place with big bombs going off. You see a big concussion, then it goes back down. The F-1 that I blew up, when that thing blew up, it was a real long burst. It blew up. It was a huge fireball, and then you could just see it trickle, a lot of pieces trickling out to the ground, and you can see it hit the ground and burn on the ground for a while.
But some Iraqi planes simply fled north.
It was a preservation move. Had they stayed on the ground, they would have been bombed, and had they come southbound into our foreship, they would have been shot down.
Soon after dawn today, the Americans were rearming their planes prior to sending them back with fresh crews for Phase 2 of Operation Desert Storm. Those who'd been in the first wave showed satisfaction at crippling Iraq's command and control defense system.
Well, the biggest thing I saw was one of the most fantastic fireworks demonstrations I've seen since 4th of July party years and years and years ago. This was tremendous. Baghdad was lit up like a Christmas tree. Looked like everything in downtown was, fireworks were going off, a lot of AAA, impacts on the ground. I think we hit there just about the time we're 40 miles south is when they're pounding targets in Baghdad.
What was your target?
We were shooting the SAMs who were trying to shoot at the guys who were doing what they were doing downtown.
You got the butterflies, you got the churn in your stomach. You don't know really what you're going to do. But it's just like a football game too. Once you get airborne and you get the jet under you and you start feeling good, then you just start working your game plan. And it's just like a game there. First couple of plays of a big football game, you settle down, you feel a lot better.
The language of Top Gun to describe an aerial juggernaut that could well grow heavier in the next 48 hours. With no real response to date from the Iraqi Air Force, there is more than a glimmer of hope tonight that the Allies could triumph without a war of attrition between the massed armies in the desert. One exiled Kuwaiti minister said here he'll be home within 10 days. The question is, can Saddam Hussein rally his strike force? Barron, BBC News, Eastern Saudi Arabia.
The British Tornado bomber that's missing came from an airbase at Bahrain. The RAF said the first mission flown from the base was a complete success. The Tornado's target were 2 airstrips in Iraqi-held territory, and the RAF commander said they were preparing for more similar raids.
This was the moment that British pilots and British planes took off to play their part in the Allied surprise attack. The Tornado's mission was to fly as low as they could, avoiding Iraqi radar, and destroy military targets in Kuwait and Iraq itself. They left a base facing the full reality of war. Reports of an Iraqi missile retaliation meant all staff taking to the bunkers in their protective clothing. It was, this time, a false alarm. Then there was a wait to hear how the mission had gone, a wait which, by early morning, was over.
RAF Tornado G-1 aircraft have flown sorties against a number of military targets in Iraq during the initial phase of the operation, which began this morning. The aircraft which carried out the sorties were supported by tanker aircraft. Combat air patrols were flown in support. All aircraft returned safely. Operations continue.
Shortly after radio confirmation of success was received, the Tornadoes themselves glided out of the dawn sky. They had taken part in the first attacks, telling physical evidence of Britain's commitment to the war effort. For the young airmen, a taste of fear and exhilaration.
Absolutely terrifying. There's no word for it. You're frightened of failure, you're frightened of dying. Oh, it's everything. You're flying as low as you dare, high enough to get the weapons off, but you push it as low as you can over the target just to get away as fast as you can.
All you could see on the right-hand side was just a mass
white explosions, yellow explosions, which will flip like flak.
Well, they've come back. They've reported the firing of missiles, explosions, lots of ground fire coming from Kuwait. They've been able to see that from the air. It was obviously a very busy night in Kuwait.
Later on in the day, as further sorties were flown, the news came that one plane and its two-man crew was missing. Proof, if it were needed, that the air war is not an easy or painless option.
The Tornadoes will almost certainly be back in action tonight. They're pleased with what they've done so far, but there's a long way to go before their difficult work is over. Justin Webb, BBC News, Eastern Saudi Arabia.
The time, 1:45 this morning. The location, an airbase somewhere in eastern Saudi Arabia, and the mission to bomb strategic targets in Iraq and Kuwait. This was one of the F-15 Eagle strike aircraft being prepared for action just moments before takeoff. They are among the very best planes in the American Air Force and with extraordinary capabilities to fly day or night in any weather at any altitude. The F-15s helped spearhead the overnight aerial assault. They were armed with air-to-air missiles and cluster bombs. Their pilots had trained long and hard for this, and as they roared off towards their targets, they were confident their vastly superior technology would do the job. In Riyadh, those people who were not woken up by the thunder of the aircraft were woken instead by the daunting sound of air raid sirens amid fears of Iraqi retaliation. 3 times during the night, they wailed across the city, sending people scurrying for their chemical warfare protection suits and gas masks. Riyadh was within range of Scud missiles, and as the Saudi Arabian capital, a potential target. There was initial anxiety and alarm as unconfirmed reports came through that Scuds had indeed been launched. Shortwave radio reports were monitored religiously, minute by minute.
The BBC just said that all targets in Baghdad and Kuwait are being attacked, and the British Air Force is also making an attack.
And there was undisguised relief when news broke that in fact Scuds had not been launched and that most of Saddam Hussein's missile sites had been hit. The exiled Kuwaitis here hadn't even bothered to take to the air raid shelters. Instead, they relaxed and expressed quiet satisfaction that the battle to liberate their country was underway.
Well, it's very happy as I am Kuwaiti, and I'm waiting for this news long time, and we are happy and we are waiting for more information what's going on.
Can I ask you, what is your reaction to the news tonight?
Well, we were expecting that. We had confidence in all the armies who were at the front, and thanks God they did it. And I said he did a big mistake, and he's paying for it now.
And what is your message to the pilots who've been flying in on these missions tonight?
God bless them, and we thank them very much.
And the exiled Crown Prince of Kuwait, Sheikh Saad, delivered this address to his people, telling them that the sunshine of liberation is near, and thanking what he called Kuwait's brotherly allies.
15634 Riyadh, you're identified and continue bound, fueling the Alpha, maintain 220, standby.
And as dawn broke, American aircraft streamed back over Riyadh. Their safe return completed an overwhelmingly successful mission, one which probably exceeded the expectations of their commanders here, even the most optimistic of them. And morale is especially high at British headquarters here in Riyadh. At this morning's operations room briefing, the Chief of Staff, Air Commodore Ian McFadden, quoted Shakespeare and King Henry V before the Battle of Agincourt. Gentlemen in England now abed should think themselves accursed. They were not here. Ben Brown, BBC News, Riyadh in Saudi Arabia.
Well, we're going back now live to join our correspondent Brian Barron in Dhahran. Brian, any slackening off in the Allied air offensive?
Not at all, Peter. In the last 2 or 3 minutes, we have again heard the roar of tornadoes and F-15s taking off just a few hundred yards from it. No doubt they're going to meet up at some rendezvous with refueling tankers and also other squadrons of Allied multinational force airplanes. So the relentless attack, the relentless assault on Iraqi positions in Kuwait and on positions around Baghdad, that goes on without any question at all.
Is it your understanding that they are re-bombing the same targets, or that as a result of intelligence on the effectiveness of the earlier hits, they're now looking at other targets?
I think it's a mixture of the two. There's no doubt that as a result of those surveillance photographs from satellites and overflights by reconnaissance planes, they've got a very good idea of what was left intact of the strategic targets they were going for, especially things I imagine like the chemical warfare plants and so on. What is incomplete in terms of destruction, they've made it very clear that they're going to go back and take out completely. And at the same time, given the size of the Iraqi armed forces, the number of air bases, 35 alone in southern Iraq, obviously even after flying perhaps 1,200 sorties in the last 15 or 16 hours, there are still many other targets to go for, and there certainly will be in the next 2 or 3 days.
How do you keep your air crew fresh under these circumstances? How do you stop them getting dog-tired?
I'll give you one example. With some of the crack American squadrons, although they may have, say, 12 or 15 planes in that squadron, they'll have perhaps 40 aircrew, 40 pilots and navigators for them, so they can rotate. These pilots, these navigators don't have to go out 2 or 3 times in a day. I think that would be just too demanding given the complexity and the nerve exhaustion factor in flying over hostile territory. So they do rotate them after they come back from a mission. Given the ample reservoirs of Allied forces, then they can take 8 or 10 hours off.
Brian Barron in Dhahran, thank you.
American journalists based in Baghdad were able to give viewers live accounts of the scene throughout the night as Iraqi anti-aircraft guns tried to beat off the Allied attack on the capital.
The skies over Baghdad have been illuminated. We're seeing bright flashes going off all over the sky. Peter?
Well, there's anti-aircraft gunfire going into the sky. We hear the sound of planes. They're coming over our hotel.
But you can perhaps hear the sound of bombs in the background. We're going to put our microphone out the window. I think you'll be able to hear this sound. Now there's a huge fire that we've just seen that is due west of our position, and we just heard, whoa, holy cow. That was a large airburst that we saw. It was filling the sky with dust.
And I think, John, that airburst took out the telecommunications.
Yeah.
Now you may hear the bombs now. If you're still with us, you can hear the bombs now. They are hitting the center of this city.
An Iraqi claim that 14 Allied aircraft had been shot down in the raid was described as ridiculous by the Pentagon. Correspondents in Baghdad have now been prevented by the Iraqis from making telephone calls out of the country. This was the last report we received from our Foreign Affairs editor, John Simpson.
From what we can tell in the restricted circumstances in which we have to work here, the attacks have been carried out so far with considerable accuracy. An eyewitness saw a cruise missile hit a security ministry building near the Sheraton Hotel last night. The building simply imploded. There was little damage to the places round it and not even much shrapnel. One of the early targets was a telecommunications tower, which is thought to carry military phone traffic. It was badly hit and the ordinary telephone system was cut. After a power station near the presidential palace was hit, the electricity over large parts of the city was cut as well. The Defense Ministry, in an attractive building near the British Embassy, was hit by at least one cruise missile. This morning, another followed the line of the road which our hotel is in, flying at around 100 feet. There are reports, inevitably unsubstantiated, that missile batteries aimed at Israel in western Iraq were taken out early in the first attack. President Saddam Hussein had promised to strike at Israel the moment he was attacked himself. The Iraqis have claimed that 14 Allied aircraft have been shot down, and people have been warned not to harm enemy pilots. A long and rambling statement from the president and another even longer letter which he addressed to President Bush were full of defiance and showed no signs of surrender. How do you imagine, the letter asks, that threats will bring this people to their knees when they kneel only to God? This has been the first really high-tech war ever fought, and even those of us who've covered other wars have been surprised by the relative lack of violence of it so far. Every so often, the outranged Iraqi guns blast away at planes and missiles which they can't reach, and there are heavy explosions. But for a couple of hours now, there's been quiet. Things could be tougher tonight, though, and this hotel and perhaps other parts of the city are without mains electricity and water. John Simpson, BBC News, Baghdad.
That was John Simpson from Baghdad before the phones were cut off. Iraqi television has been showing pictures of Saddam Hussein, some of them reportedly taken during and after the bombing of the city. Brian Hanrahan in London has been monitoring the Iraqi pictures.
The release of the pictures is an indication of how the Iraqi authorities are attempting to regain control of their propaganda after the confusion generated by a night of bombing. They show Saddam Hussein praying, reinforcing his constant message that this is a religious war in which Islam is pitted against the infidels. But there's no sign as yet that this has weakened the resolve of the Arab members of the coalition. Another sequence shows him out in the streets. The implication is that he's undaunted by the repeated bombing raids, but it's impossible to know when the pictures were taken. There's no sign of damage, and only a few people are shown greeting him. Throughout the day, Baghdad radio and television have been broadcasting martial music and defiance. Messages and speeches by the president have been relayed saying that Iraq will not yield and warning his people that the mother of battles has begun. But although he castigates America for attacking him, the general reaction around the world has been to blame Saddam Hussein personally for forcing an unwanted war. The videotape faults show that his speech certainly was recorded. In it, he again tries to turn this from a war over Kuwait into a bid to liberate Palestine.
And to get rid of those, after we get rid of the Satan in the White House, the hornet nest in the White House, and the poisonous hornet nest in Tel Aviv. And so we will liberate our dear Palestine and restore its territory to its owners and liberate Lebanon and Golan Heights.
There are other pictures of Saddam Hussein with his high command. American officials have said they've not tried to target the Iraqi leader personally. That, they say, is too complicated. Better to destroy his ability to control the army. There have also been Iraqi announcements praising the Republican Guard, the elite of the Iraqi armed forces, who the Americans say are on the list to be bombed. The Iraqi announcer, attempting to enthuse them, said, "How sweet is victory."